want to talk about this in a large way because I personally think that sleep disruption is one of the biggest factors in developing neurodegeneration. Because if you, yeah,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
your interaction with light is so crucial to that. And I would say majority of the population, not just in the US, but globally, has sleep issues. This is a huge problem. And I do think that is playing into neurodegeneration down the line. Because if you think about sleep, when we are asleep, I just did a big podcast on sleep for my podcast, Hello Brain. There's my little plug for that. When we are sleeping, that is the brain and body's chance to sort of,
Mhm.
it's like doing the rinse cycle. It's like putting your brain through the dishwasher where your neurons shrink, there's more cerebrospinal fluid moving around, and that allows it to clean out waste products, right?
It is very, very well established in the research literature that when it comes to brain health, getting the correct light signals and darkness signals is crucial to preventing neurodegenerative diseases and or living with them if we're already past that point. What I hear really so often though is somebody gets a diagnosis, like a big one, like a Parkinson's or an Alzheimer's. Obviously, they go and get the very best medical care that they can. And then someone in their life starts to talk to them about light, and they're like, well, I have a really good doctor, and she didn't mention that. I am, at one of the best hospital systems in the country, and they're not recommending that. So it can't be real. And here's what to say to that. I think a lot of us, and I certainly thought this up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I really believed, and I think most people do, especially when they pay top dollar for premium healthcare, that once new evidence emerges that can be extremely helpful and that is different from what was known previously, there's just some kind of universal upload of that information into the medical system. And everyone starts to recommend the new thing now that they know it's real. And we know that that is not at all how it works. There's a really, really big gap. It's called the translational gap. You can look it up, you can Google it. And that's the time between when we know something to be true and when it gets implemented at a large scale. So, for example, it took decades from when we understood that it was probably better for surgeons to wash their hands before they delivered babies or operated. It was decades before that became common practice, even though the research was there. That's just how the translational gap works. And we're in that right now with light. And so that's why your father's doctor isn't saying anything. That's why your sister's doctor isn't saying anything, because it hasn't crossed the translational gap yet. And that is why I wanted to have someone on the podcast to talk about it who is a true expert, so that you can share this or even refer to it. And it's not like, oh, this lady on Instagram said this. This is a PhD neuroscientist. Okay. Her name is Ramona von Leden. She has bachelor's in psychology from Brown University and a PhD in neuroscience from the Uniformed Services University of Health and Sciences. She has been awarded 2 National Research Service Awards from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. She has published her original research on identification of novel targets from treating neurotrauma and neuroinflammation in peer-reviewed scientific journals. So Ramona has all the credentials, and I thought that was really important because I feel like there are so many people needlessly suffering worse symptoms than they need to, purely because they are not taking their light and darkness cycle seriously. I want to get the word out and get it out in a way that will land and make sense to them and understand that this is real. There are things we can do. And we're very close to having the medical community be on board with these protocols. We're just not quite there yet. But this is your life and you're allowed to do what you want. So you can take new information on board as per your own sovereign discernment. All right. Enjoy my conversation with Ramona. Visit my friends at bondcharge.com if you need anything to support your circadian rhythms. And if you're not measuring your lux, I really do recommend the My Circadian app And that app is a really fun, easy way to see what the heck is going on, making sure your lux is bright enough in the morning and dim enough in the evening. And I also do really recommend going to qbcpod.com, the tools I use page, and getting some information on phototherapy patches. I don't recommend the long-term use of a lot of things, but I do recommend these very strongly and encourage anyone to check them out. Okay, have a good time with me and Ramona.
Ramona von Leden, welcome to the QVC podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking about brains with you.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Brains and neuroscience in general is my favorite topic. So always jump at the chance to have a conversation.
Okay, so real quick, explain to us like your background a little bit, how you ended up where you are, what you've studied, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start, just to give the lay of the land, what I do now is I work with energetic companies is a great way to put it. I work with companies that do modalities that all harness naturally occurring energies non-invasively to help support the brain and body. My full-time role, I'm the senior director at Winback America Medical Affairs. And then I am a scientific advisor for two startups, Neuronic, which we'll be talking about a little bit today, as well as the Brain Innovation Network, which is a very cool marketplace for brain health as well. I
Cool.
got here, shall we say, my background, I have my PhD in neuroscience, obviously, so I really love it. I committed my professional life to it. But I did my PhD work at the Uniformed Services University, which is the military's medical school, working on traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury and mechanisms of inflammation related to that. Actually, also on how age can change how we respond on the inflammatory processes. And then when I finished my PhD in 2017, I went on to UT Austin for my postdoctoral fellowship, where I worked with the brand new neurology department at the time. Now it's already been, I can't believe it, 10 years almost, working on pediatric traumatic brain injury. And again, sort of the mechanisms that play into recovery from neurodegeneration related to a traumatic injury. And then once I left the academic space, I wanted to keep working in this as I kind of mentioned before we started recording today. Within my academic studies, I started to see this pattern where a lot of the mechanisms were all related to either metabolism or cellular impacts that really have to do with how we engage and interact with our environments. And so I sought out companies prior to my current roles. I was with a direct current electrical stimulation company, NewFit, all of these being non-invasive modalities that really work to harness the energies that are around us to help us live a little bit more high quality lives.
Love it. Say a little bit more about what you noticed, the patterns that you noticed when you were doing your research and your studies that led you away from a more traditional path and toward companies and modalities that use energy and not, say, pharmaceuticals or
Yeah,
surgeries or something like that. Like,
absolutely. And because I think that's actually in the academic space, it's pretty common that, usually and in fact, that was one of the first projects I worked on. It's like, oh, we're looking at a drug that might target this specific enzyme that could reduce inflammation. But realistically, what I was working on, I remember in grad school, I was working on a project that was on using PET imaging to look at, and PET imaging being glucose uptake
mhm.
in the body, and to look at the patterns after spinal cord injury. And you were seeing this really big change in glucose uptake. And now I was looking at aged animals versus young animals. And that was where this kind of really interesting pattern started emerging. That was about, you saw this massive decrease in glucose uptake and utilization in your aged animals who had a spinal cord injury compared to ones that were younger. I don't want to say more robust, but yes, a younger aged animal. And that kind of like lit up this little light bulb in me that said, okay, well, maybe what the the problem really is, we're seeing in neurodegeneration or in any kind of injury to the nervous system, you see mitochondrial dysfunction, you see reduced metabolic activity, and you see impaired signaling. So is this really a problem that revolves around energetics and energy and getting enough energy to the cells so that they can function at their highest, rather than kind of looking at it as something we have to fix with the pharmaceuticals? And that was really like, for me, a bit of a light bulb moment where it's like, okay, perhaps rather than always looking at these questions as how do we fix a problem, it's how do we support the system so the problem never occurs, so that we can prevent it from worsening.
Yes. Good for you. I mean, it's because it really makes so much sense. I mean, everyone sort of throws around the term root cause, right?
Yeah.
But what we're really saying is we're tired of just treating the symptoms and the signals that our cells and then our bodies are giving off with a short-term solution, when if we went back, like, as you were saying, if we supported the whole system, those symptoms wouldn't occur in the first place.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing in the broader culture a shift, and it's probably who I pay attention to, but I am noticing a shift of people more commonly suggesting that the future of medicine is not pharmacologically based, and
I
that
couldn't agree more.
we are potentially
Yeah.
missing the boat as much as drugs are needed, because sometimes we do have those symptoms we want to deal. But I'm sensing the tide is turning slightly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a really interesting shift on how people look at their own health. In that, I think maybe this is a benefit of the internet. I don't know, but people are more educated. They're sharing information, and of course, not all information that's being shared is perfectly accurate. But it's enough to get people thinking about and reading about
Yeah.
and trying to understand their bodies better. I think we have now the ability to learn a lot more on our own than we used to. And so people do have more understanding and do have more knowledge of their bodies than they would maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. And obviously, like, if you have a background like mine, or if you have a background like yours, you've spent a lot of time doing this. But I think even the average person has access that they didn't used to have before. And I will say, pharmaceuticals, it's an interesting paradox, because pharmaceuticals had their purpose. Obviously, there are certain diseases, infections, things that we have been able to resolve or to manage with pharmaceuticals in an amazing way. However, I also think that Western medicine over relies on the use of pharmaceuticals as well. When a lot of times there are things that are naturally occurring and that are in our world already that we can harness in a more substantial way to support the body first. It's not that there isn't a place for pharmaceuticals, but like
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the first line of defense. Um, and that's where it's been pretty cool. I think there's a trend in the tech space, in the med tech space, of looking at more naturally occurring energies, at really relying more on kind of moving away from invasive technologies and more to non-invasive. How do we support the body, allow the body to do the healing that it's very capable of doing on its own?
Yes. Yes. And your work is to translate the research, translate the academic work into products that can support our healing and to create that bridge. And I think that, my work, I was one of those average people you just talked about who had access to information on the internet and dove in and decided, to become a bridge to the publics to help to create the demand for these shifts that
I
are
love
so
that.
important. Because
Yeah.
right now, people who don't do that are showing up at the most famous medical clinics in let's say, the United States. My daughter they're like, oh yeah, your teenage daughter's suffering from all these symptoms. She has POTS. She has fibromyalgia. She has this. See ya. Come back when the symptoms are so bad, we have a drug for it. And the public they're not accepting that anymore.
Yeah, I think, and this is probably, I will say this is definitely a US specific phenomenon that I'm going to talk to, is that the insurance model in the United States has often been reactionary rather than precautionary. And so, like you just spoke to, if your teenage daughter goes in and she has subclinical symptoms. So she knows something is going on, but it's not bad enough yet. Well, we're not going to do anything about it. And that's, to me, that's kind of silly because you know it's coming. It's just a matter of time. And if you have ways to support the body so that, again, especially when we kind of move into more talking about neurodegeneration, this is a big one for me, is that diseases like Alzheimer's, no, we don't have a cure for these, right? We do not. But there are ways that we can support the body so that the symptoms don't progress as quickly, so that the symptoms aren't as big of an impact on your quality of life, so that you can postpone it from being so bad, rather than waiting until it gets bad enough and then saying, well, now let's use a pharmaceutical to tackle it.
Right. Okay, so you've brought up Alzheimer's, and this is really what I wanted to get into with you today is, why or not why, let's start with what is happening when our brains stop working. Because from an anecdotal perspective, I'm involved in various communities with a lot of people in the generation above me.
Right.
And so I know a lot of people who are, 20, 30 years older than I am. And they almost everyone is either taking care of someone with dementia, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's, or has a diagnosis of one of those things. And I feel when I was a child at my grandparents' generation, it wasn't as common. And so I haven't looked at, the statistical analysis of this, but as a person living in the world, living in a developed country, I feel, there's a woman that I used to know and when I lived in Hong Kong, and she now heads up a foundation for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, because it's just such an issue for so many people. So why are our brains, like, what's happening in there
Yeah.
that
Well,
we're all
first of
getting,
all,
so many
yeah,
people are getting these diagnoses?
I would like to kind of comment on that because I think
Okay.
it's not necessarily that more people are getting it. There's a couple of really key factors we have to remember.
Okay.
Our ability to diagnose earlier has improved. We understand these diseases better, so we can diagnose earlier. We can kind of see the symptoms earlier. Also, people live longer now, like just facts. Like we do in general live a lot longer than we used to. So this is what I kind of spoke about a little bit earlier, is when you have someone who has a neurodegenerative condition, there probably were plenty of people, let's say 50, 60 years ago, who might have developed Alzheimer's if they actually got to 80, 90 years old, but maybe they didn't make it to that age. So you didn't
Yep.
see it. And there was actually a really interesting study, and this is in the traumatic brain injury space in Europe, maybe 10, 15 years ago, which was looking at professional football players or soccer players there. And the question was, because they get concussions, the question was, do professional football players in Europe live longer or shorter, and are they more likely to develop a neurodegenerative disease than the average population? And what the outcomes were was they said, yes, these professional football players do have a higher likelihood of developing a neurodegenerative disease, and we can talk about how traumatic brain injury might play into that. However, they're also living an average of maybe 10 years longer than the average population because their cardiovascular health is higher. So then the kind of authors of the study put that to the plate, which is, are we seeing a higher prevalence of Alzheimer's because they have these other conditions, or is it because they live longer? And that's not a question that I know that we can totally answer, but I think it's a factor we should think about when we think about why we see higher rates of things at this point in time. That being said,
Yeah.
when we get into sort of the energetics around neurodegeneration, neurodegeneration, I think the terminology, most people would think, oh, it's cells dying. And it's not really about cells dying. It's about cells that aren't functioning properly anymore. And a lot of times that's, again, revolves around energetics. So I mentioned there's a few things that in neurodegeneration, in any neurodegenerative disease, you're going to see. Doesn't matter if it's MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, et cetera. You're going to see dysfunction in the mitochondria. That's your energy producers. Most people have heard that as like a buzzword. You're going to see reduced metabolic flexibility, or the reduced ability for people to utilize their energy. So the metabolism is slowed in these cells. It's not functioning properly. And that all those two things, not being able to basically use your energy efficiently, creates impaired cellular signaling down the line. And that can be everything from glucose, that can also be your electrolytes, so potassium, calcium, all the things that are involved, magnesium, things that are involved in nerve signaling. If you're not able to process all of those pieces correctly, you're going to see an impact on your cells and the function.
Right. And so mitochondrial health, metabolic health, we're talking whole system. What is it
Yeah.
about a person that will then have that show up as neurodegeneration as opposed to, say, I don't know, diabetes or cancer?
Well, it's funny you bring up diabetes because have you heard this term that now they're calling Alzheimer's like type 3 diabetes?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think they're
Okay.
not related. And again, now
Mm,
here's where you get into the weeds of like genetics. You know, there isn't a component there for sure, especially when it comes to things like Alzheimer's. There is a genetic link to it. Not all neurodegenerative disease have a genetic link, as we've seen with things like MS or ALS. Those often don't.
mhm.
And so there's other environmental factors that can play into that. And I think that's probably what we'll spend a good chunk of this time talking about. Because it is nature and nurture really do kind of combine in this space where the support that you're giving to your body, the environment you've grown up around, kind of the nurturing of both the body and brain plays such a huge factor in this.
Okay. Okay, let's get into the weeds a little bit on that. Like, so we've put ourselves in environments that are not, let's just say, not supportive
Yeah.
to our mitochondrial function, um, or our metabolic function.
Yeah.
So, talk to me how that translates into neurodegeneration.
Yeah. So let's take a step back and kind of set the stage on what that means in general. I think when
Okay.
we talk about putting ourselves in an environment that's not conducive to sort of working with it. So if you think about it, our cycles, our circadian rhythms, right? We are built to interact with the sun and to interact
Mhm.
with light. Where when we get up in the morning, we should have natural sunlight. It helps to set our circadian rhythms. You go throughout your day, you work, and then you sleep in the darkness. But that's like basically almost the opposite of what most people are doing at this point. Even if you're awake during those daylight hours, most people are indoors, right, in unnatural light. Most people get very little natural light throughout their day. And then in the evenings, when it's darkness, they're using fluorescent lightings, they're on their computers, they're watching their TVs, they're interacting with their cell phones, which is all, again, natural light, blue light, things that disrupt your circadian cycle. And I want to talk about this in a large way because I personally think that sleep disruption is one of the biggest factors in developing neurodegeneration. Because if you, yeah,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
your interaction with light is so crucial to that. Um, and I would say majority of the population, not just in the US, but globally, has sleep issues. This is a huge problem. And I do think that that is playing into neurodegeneration down the line. Um, because if you think about sleep, when we are asleep, I just did a big podcast on sleep for my podcast, Hello Brain. There's my little plug for that. Um, when we are sleeping, that is the brain and body's chance to sort of
Mhm.
it's like doing the rinse cycle. It's like putting your brain through the dishwasher where your neurons shrink. There's more cerebrospinal fluid moving around, and that allows it to clean out waste products, right? Every part of our body has waste products that are made throughout the day. As you use up the cells, as you use up your energy, as you consume your nutrients, that's normal. And of course, in like our digestive organs, you have your liver that's processing things, but it all works to reduce the waste, right? In the brain, that's sleep. Sleep is that process. So the cells shrink when you're asleep. The fluid can move around. It can get rid of that waste product. And that includes very substantially neurodegeneration related waste products. So that's amyloid beta, that's those tau proteins, all of that can be moved out by your cerebrospinal fluid at night. That's the glymphatic drainage system. If you are not getting adequate sleep, your brain does not have a chance to go through that process. Um, Especially considering how like our sleep cycles. So the first, they say 7 to 9 hours is an ideal amount of sleep. And there's a reason for that. The first maybe 4 or 5 hours is really a physical recovery. It's more of the deep sleep that's very much like the body recovering. And then those last couple of sleep cycles, that 5 to 7 hours, is when you start moving into more REM sleep cycles, which is more focused on cognitive recovery. And so, and cognitive processing, that's where we consolidate memories. That's where we do things like that. So for people, which, I would say a lot of people are probably sleeping closer to 6 hours a night, you're missing this really crucial window that's so important to setting the brain up for success the next day. Um, and so over time, if you keep doing that, if you keep having this, and there's of course high levels of insomnia, anxiety, all of these things factor into poor sleep, that builds up. We're not able to handle that long term, and that can turn into a higher likelihood for neurodegeneration. That I think is probably the biggest factor of all is sleep issues.
It makes so much sense. And I think there was a study just done in like the last year and a half or so where they looked at the streetlights coming into people's bedrooms. And I forget what the original purpose of the study was, but what they found was a prevalence in early onset Alzheimer's amongst the people who had streetlights coming into their bedrooms at night.
Yeah.
So is that could you explain sort of why they found that?
Yeah, again, this comes back to how our body responds to light. When we see light, we think we're supposed to be awake. Right? So that's why your sleep environment is so crucial. Sleeping in a dark room, because then your sleep cycles will have a chance to kind of move through their system the way they should, rather than in a disrupted pattern. It's funny you mentioned the street light things. When I moved into my house that I'm in now, the street light was out in front of my house, and it was really dark at night. And I was like, oh, that's not, because like I would walk my dog at night, and I'd be like, oh, I should get that street light fixed so that it's not super dark in case there's a car or something like that. And I didn't realize it until they fixed the street light, how much I hated it for my sleep, because my bedroom windows were like right there. And so now I have like my curtains drawn. I've got blackout curtains. Like I did, because I was like, the first night that I slept with the street light being fixed was like so hard to fall asleep compared to all those nights when there hadn't been. And I think anybody who's like, you spend like a weekend in the mountains or in the countryside, somewhere where you have less natural light that less unnatural light that you're interacting with, you can tell. But really it is, it's that response of the body to light. Our cells respond to light. They see it as, we're supposed to be awake. Again, that's why in the evening, if you have bright lights, fluorescent lights, blue lights, it's going to trigger the brain to think, oh, I'm supposed to still be awake. I'm supposed to still be moving and working, when really that should be when you're winding down.
Right. And that bright light before bed, and even, the light coming in the window in this study, like it wasn't like there wasn't people like sleeping with their TVs on in their bedroom. It was just the light coming through like the crack in the curtains.
Yeah.
But it was enough to affect their brain health in such a significant way that they started to develop Alzheimer's symptoms.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're saying, is because the brain wasn't able to complete its cleaning cycle.
Yeah. Well, I would say that probably
More or
that
less.
addition of the extra light was disrupting their normal sleep patterns. Yeah.
Right. And the sleep pattern is there to like clean out our brains.
Yeah.
See, I think this is so important because I want to share this episode with people who have dementia in their lives. Because everywhere I go, it's like, oh, there's dementia support groups, and also, like has become such a burden. And I understand your point about, statistically or not, but the burden is there
Oh,
on
100%.
the
Absolutely.
population. Yeah. And, I want to ask, like, can I come to this support group and talk about and ask if you have blackout curtains, or,
Yeah.
just because it's not a connection that people are making, and it's not a connection I think that most people's physicians are making for them. So I
Yeah. I mean,
really, really want to make it really clearly.
yeah, I wonder, when you go in for a physical, your physician never asks what's your sleep environment or how are you sleeping. That's not, the on the topic. Which is funny because you would think it's kind of an obvious one.
Yeah. Especially as the research around how important sleep is continues to grow and grow.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I came of age in a time where it was like the cool kids in the culture were like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, I just did this sleep podcast and we literally addressed that where it's like, except that you can't, like, it's not worth the sacrifice of sleep, for, to be cognitively impaired when you're older. Like, it's not true. The adage that like people can get used to not sleeping. No, you can't. Your body will, essentially what happens if you're chronically sleep deprived, your body will use other mechanisms to try to keep you awake. Right. So it'll use dopamine, it'll use arousal hormones to try to force your body to stay awake, but it doesn't mean you're well rested. I remember somebody saying to me, like, oh, when I stay up all night, like I feel like delirious, so good. Like I feel delirious, but it feels good. And I'm like, that's your body literally being like, what do I have to throw at this to stay awake right now? Because I'm so sleep
Right.
deprived. Like it's not a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, I remember there was a time when my first two children were really little. It was like there's like baby toddler stage, right? And the sleep deprivation, I remember feeling like there was like a curtain across my
Yeah.
brain between me and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Living in a fog.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was technically awake going through the motions required of me, but it was like I felt almost far away physically from reality.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, obviously there are times in your life when it's just you
Yeah.
just can't, right? You have a toddler, you have kids, some reason there's something going on with your work environment. You have to be sleep deprived for a little while. You just try to limit how much that
Yeah.
happens. Right. But, because it's so much, sleep being a big factor in this, but anything that's kind of preventing your brain from its optimal state is also going to prevent, and encourage in some ways neuroinflammation, which I also think is a huge factor in what we see, in neurodegenerative disease is if you have chronic inflammation. Again, I hate, like, we hear inflammation and we think bad. Inflammation has its place. It has a purpose. If you have an injury, the inflammatory process is doing something good for your body. It is helping. The problem is when it becomes chronic. And so when you have a situation in the brain where perhaps you have toxic materials or waste that are building up, again, perhaps it's because you're not sleeping well, your neuroinflammatory system becomes chronically active. And that's where you see some of the negative effects of inflammation long term as well.
Right. So we're talking about a chronically inflamed brain
Right.
when we talk about neurodegeneration.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then if you could just sort of talk about the differences, like from an academic or even a clinical perspective, what is the difference between, say, an Alzheimer's diagnosis and a dementia diagnosis and a Parkinson's diagnosis, like where versus a TBI, you know,
Yeah. So,
that won't recover.
right. So all of these different neurodegenerative conditions will have different, a lot of times. So in the dementia space, let's start there because
Okay.
there's quite a big difference between these. In the dementia space, an Alzheimer's versus a, let's say, frontotemporal lobe dementia,
Mhm.
it's more going to be where you see the degeneration. So in frontotemporal lobe dementia, kind of as it says from the title, you're going to see it largely in the frontotemporal lobe. You might see behavioral changes. You might see some reductions in inhibitions. You might, as they um, lose short-term memory, things like that. And Alzheimer's, often, again, you're going to see this very much in the hippocampus, in the memory centers, but also in some of the other areas of the brain that are more related to things like sense of self. So there's actually some interesting work on Alzheimer's that shows that for people who have Alzheimer's, that it's not just that they're forgetting, they're actually kind of losing an identity in the process, which is where the confusion comes in. So that more has to do with what region of the brain is seeing atrophy. And now here, here's where that coming back to the glucose question is
Mhm.
that the regions of the brain that are most affected in an Alzheimer's patient, those are the regions of the brain that require the most metabolic activity. So those are the ones that require the most glucose, the hippocampus being one of those. And of course, that's why I say I come back to that, because most people think of Alzheimer's and they think you've lost your memory, but it's more than that. It's the some of the midbrain structures that are more involved in how you interact with the world. And that's why you see some of these behavioral changes in Alzheimer's, where people are like, wow, they don't, they get angry really easily. They're frustrated because they're actually having atrophy in those areas that are related more to their personality and their sense of self. um Parkinson's, that is sort of its own category, because that is more of a dopamine issue than it is, not to say there aren't elements that are glucose related, but largely a reduction in loss of dopamine production in Parkinson's is going to be the major cause for what you see, in terms of the symptoms. And then traumatic brain injury is obviously a impact that has caused damage. But essentially traumatic brain injury sort of kickstarts a neurodegenerative process. And so there is some research that suggests that if you have a TBI and you maybe had a genetic predisposition for neurodegeneration, that it might start it earlier.
Hmm.
And that often is related to the inflammatory process, because if you've kind of kickstarted all of that into gear, now you have a higher likelihood that's going to happen at a younger age than it would have otherwise. Um, that's probably the big four when it comes to that. But
Yep.
then you can get also into things like MS or ALS, which are MS is more related to the myelin sheaths, and sort of, again, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, much more about the physical changes than it is cognitive. In fact, in like ALS patients, oftentimes cognitively they're completely functional, but they can't move, which is a really scary condition, right? It's like they call it being buried alive, terrifying, versus like these more cognitively focused ones like Alzheimer's or dementia.
Right. But it's still all related to the brain.
Well, it's all related to the nervous system. I will say, like, this is where I am a little different from I love the brain, but the brain and the nervous system interact together. And really our nervous system is what we interact with the world with, right? Through
Hmm.
our hands, through our fingers, through our toes. So these are the central nervous system is really, always the big piece. And that includes the brain.
Beautiful. Say more about that. I love this.
Yeah. So from the base level, how we interact with the world, our brain, of course, is sort of like the processing system. It takes all of the input that we get throughout the day and it processes it and then creates output. But you can think about our nervous system as an input-based system. So you touch something, you taste something, you see something, you smell something. All of our different senses are different parts of the nervous system taking in information that is inputs that then the brain has to process and decide how it wants to respond to. So right now, you ask me a question, right? I'm hearing it. I think my brain is processing that information to say, like, how do I want to respond to that? But it can be anything from, opening a door. It's like your hand touches that doorknob, you turn it, your brain says, okay, turn that doorknob, pull, use your muscles to pull. So they're very much, it's always a constant interaction between the brain and the nervous system. The nervous system, without the nervous system, the brain has no information.
Right. And this comes back to what you were saying earlier about mitochondrial and metabolic health is
Right.
it's
Because
our
we
nervous
need
system that's interacting with our environment.
right. And all cells, whether they're neurons or whether they're the muscular cells or whether they're any cell in the body, mitochondria is in every cell we have. It is
Mhm.
our energy producer. It's our energy. It's what processes our energy. It is, it's the powerhouse of the cell. There's a reason that it's called that. Um, because what it does is it produces ATP, which is how we can utilize our cells and how we process our energy. So mitochondria is definitely something that if you can support mitochondrial health, the rest of the cell gets healthier too,
Right. All the way up to the brain.
all the way up to the brain, every part.
Because I think one of the deeply held beliefs about these neurodegenerative diseases is that there's not much to be done.
Right.
Like once you're on that track, you're on that track. In your experience, is that accurate?
I think once you're on that track, it would be hard to get completely back to normal. However, I think as we talked about before we started recording, there's a lot that can be done to support the body, no matter at what stage you are, to one, prevent it from getting worse, and to manage the symptoms that you may be already having. And if you are able to manage it in a significant capacity, maybe you can start to improve it. I just that can be a really long process. So, I'm hesitant to say like, oh, this is how you like cure something, but
Of
certainly
course,
there's
yes.
certainly things you can do to support the body at whatever phase you are at.
And so what would your message be to say somebody who is caring for a partner or a parent who is suffering from one of these things? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Honestly, I would say to start looking at patterns in the environment, to start looking at the habits that you and the person you are caring for have throughout the day, and start to create a routine that is more in line with the environment. And one that starts with sleep. Sleep is the first one, but that means being conscious of circadian rhythms, being conscious of when your body wants to be awake versus when it is asleep, being conscious of how much light you're getting at night, being conscious of getting outside in the morning, getting sunlight first thing. Um, that that would be number one. And also because routine can also help in the situation where somebody is dealing with dementia. A routine helps them to feel familiar, it helps them feel comfortable, and then they might be more open and able to take on some of these additional support systems in a bigger way.
And so I really appreciate you saying that because I mean those are all good things for everybody to do, caregiver included.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but I do notice, when I speak to two family members dealing with this, that there is like this feeling of defeat almost like, well, we're trying this drug, we'll see what happens, right? And
yeah,
it's I think a really important message to share that there are, yes, we can create a more supportive environment
yeah.
is still really, really worth doing, even if you're in a bad place with these situations.
Yeah, 100%. I think we've gotten into a weird place where we treat our body as if it's something foreign.
Yeah.
It's not, right? The pharmaceuticals, as I said, pharmaceuticals have their place, and that when there is a situation that, as I said, cancer drugs, things like that, that can literally change someone's life. That is wonderful. But even if you are on one of these pharmaceuticals, you should be looking at every way possible you can to support the body and to support the body to be at its best. Um, and this includes everything from, being active, whether it's just getting out for a walk every day. This is something I talk about all the time. When I tell people when they're like, "Oh, what would you suggest as like the best thing you can do for your health?" First thing in the morning, I walk my dog, and am so grateful that I have a dog because I get out, I get sunlight, I get uh um m- moderate exercise, right? This isn't like super hard exercise. It's enough that it's anti-inflammatory. It helps get things moving in the body. It helps blood oxygenation and blood flow. All of that supports the body. And I think for someone who's dealing with these chronic conditions, as you said, they can get really defeated and they can start to think like, oh, this is just how it is. I have to live with this. And it's like, well, what if, yes, there were elements that were there, but what if, like, generally speaking, their day to day life could be normal? That would take a ton of pressure off of the caregiver. It would make them feel more comfortable. And a lot of that can come back to just supporting your whole body through nutrition, through light exposure, through, again, through activity, all these things that are free. They don't cost anything to do. Like,
Yes.
but we're a sedentary society at this point, and that's our biggest problem.
Yes, we're sitting still inside in front of a computer or a
Right.
TV
Yeah.
most of the time, and I can understand how that would happen, but, if somebody's unwell and they do wanna sit and watch their show, like, that would be fine, but maybe like give them some orange tinted glasses if it's nighttime, or just think about ways to get
Yeah.
in to support so they're not like layering on toxic light signaling on
Yeah.
top of
Well, and there's
whatever
just
else is happening.
right, and it's timing. Like, by all means, I certainly watch TV shows in the evening when I've had a long day of thinking and like maybe I'm enjoying a series by all means, but I don't have a TV in my bedroom. When I turn that TV off and I go into my bedroom, it's dark. I read a book. That's it. But that's very important to me is like separation of the light from outside the bedroom to inside the bedroom. I think that's a big one.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I like watching shows too. I do make everyone wear the glasses though. The basket.
That's
The
great. I love
basket
that.
of blue blockers.
No, that's great. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. These are my like my computer glasses because they're blue light blockers.
Mhm.
And I find myself just wearing them all the time because I'm like, hey, I know that's just helping.
Yeah, because the screen light, I did an interview with on John Kuta, who did the daylight computer, and he in his research talked to one of the guys who developed screens, back in the 1970s, I think. And this guy was like, he said something to the effect of, if I had had any idea that my grandchildren were going to be sitting in front of one of these things for 7 hours a day, I would really have thought about it differently.
Wow. Yeah.
You
Hindsight's
know?
2020.
Yeah, and you just
Yeah.
realize you're like, oh,
Yeah.
look, we made this thing. It works. Like you're not thinking about the biological impacts
Yeah.
necessarily. And then just the way technology evolved, it's like we're sitting in front of it 8 hours a day
Yeah.
or
And it's
more.
interesting you bring that up because I think that's how a lot of technology is, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
cell phones, these are all of these different technologies are emitting some kind of energetic signal. And you know, when it comes to the health med tech space, most of the modalities that we're using there, we have designed the signal to be beneficial to the body, but that's not the case for a laptop computer or a cell phone. Like they're not thinking about, oh, is this wavelength going to benefit the body? Is it going to wake up? Is it going to encourage more alertness in the body versus restfulness? Like that's not the end goal because that's not the purpose of the device.
Right. And so what are the effects of, we have surrounded ourselves with devices
Yeah.
that were built for a function and a
Yeah.
purpose, but not at all keeping towards, not even just enhancing biology, but not harming it.
Yeah. This is interesting because I think this is very much different people have different responses to like cell phone energies, things like that,
Mhm.
where and a lot of times someone who's had like a chronic infection, like a Lyme or a mold or something like that, will find that they're more sensitive to
Mhm.
some of these energetic factors because their brain and body are a little bit more vulnerable. Um so, you know, I think I feel somewhere in the middle on this, to be honest with you. Like, I
Mhm.
don't think it's like the end of the world if your cell phone is in your pocket or, that you're talking on your cell phone. I don't think that's going to be the end of everything for you. I do think there's a lot of intelligence in keeping all screens out of places where you are resting because again, the wavelengths that are going through these devices are more designed for an active state. Also because, you start interacting with your phone and it's designed to literally give you small dopamine hits all the time, which will just arouse your nervous system rather than, help it to down regulate. So I think there
Right.
is an impact of that. But I think if people are conscious about their use of their devices and when that is probably the biggest help. I think a lot of people don't even realize how much they're using their devices. There's a couple of studies that have been done now that have talked about like the amount of people who are addicted to their cell phones, and it's way underreported. Like, how many times a day do you reach for your cell phone? Do you check for a text message? Do you do all these things? And you don't think about it, right? Because it's become that
Yeah.
habitual.
And not
Um,
only that, if you don't do that, everyone's like, where are you? Why didn't you answer me? I need this,
yeah,
like, I need to know this thing. Like, or they'll email you. And then if you don't email back, then they'll text you. It's like,
yeah. I remember a time when I would like, now if I'm like, I teach yoga on the side a little bit. And I always have my phone in like airplane mode when I'm teaching. And I remember a time when I'd, be in airplane mode and turn it back on and there'd be no notifications. So now every time it's like 15 notifications and I'm like, Jesus Christ, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like it's only been 1 hour.
Yeah.
So
And again, talking about the nervous system, like we're processing all of like, oh, this person, oh, this person, oh, this, like
yeah.
it's a lot. Even though like I work from home and I'm often alone in my house, I still feel like overloaded with people through
Yeah,
these
we
devices.
the I think that this yeah, we could talk all day about this, I think, is our ability to connect with everybody all the time, it has turned us into thinking that we can do way more than we probably should be.
Mm, yeah.
Right? You can respond, you can answer these questions, you can be answering an email when you're doing X, Y, and Z. You know, there's a lot of bleeding of work life and personal life and just engagement with people because of the way that our technology has infiltrated our lives.
Yes. Yeah. And it's all, yeah. And it's leading back to us having all kinds of symptoms, as we've been discussing, where
Yeah, I would say
really
that,
like,
there's an element of our being in a heightened stress response. I think the nervous system stress response is a big factor here. Your nervous system, you have two main or your autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's running that you don't think about, your breath, um, movement, things like this. Like I'm talking with my hands. I don't think about this. These are all not autonomic, but more the digestion, the breath, the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. When you're stressed, your autonomic nervous system goes into sympathetic or fight or flight. And humans, we are designed to get rid of stress through physical movement, but right, because in sort of like olden times or Neanderthal times or however you want to think about it, if you were stressed, it was probably because you were being chased by something, because there was an imminent danger that you needed to respond to. And so you had to respond to it in a physical way. And that's how we reduce it, which is why people always talk about exercise being such a good thing, because it helps you to get rid of some of that cortisol and that stress that's building up in your body. Because now we have so much emotional stress and it has no outlet. And so that's where things like breath work and light movement can be essential to down regulating the nervous system so that we can get adequate and quality rest.
yes. And just having this framework, just having this type of thinking as a framework in our minds can shift the outcome of our health, can shift how we care for somebody who's
Yeah,
experiencing, the ill effects of dementia or Alzheimer's or
absolutely.
Parkinson's or whatever. This is,
Our outlook is huge.
yeah. Yeah. And it helps, and then we can make decisions
Yeah,
that are supportive with instead of unknowingly making decisions that are making it worse. And I think that's the piece that I really wanted to get reach people with today is that, just having information so you can choose, you can make choices that can
sure.
be supportive. And then there's also the devices. So
Yeah,
that you're talking about. And again, this is these are not invasive. These are not putting
no.
something into your body. So tell me about so the light product is called Neuronic
Yeah, so I'll
and
show it to you.
it's
This
like
is
a
the helmet right
helmet.
here.
Oh, wait, it
It
looks like
is,
a bike helmet. Okay.
yeah, it looks like a bike helmet. This is Neuronic. It's called the Light device. Um, what Neuronic does, we're using a near infrared light to
Okay.
stimulate the brain for cognitive health. We've talked about light quite a bit today. Different wavelengths of light all have different impacts on the body. None are necessarily better than the other. They just have different impacts, right? So near infrared light, our wavelength being 1070, is specifically going to penetrate deeper into the brain, deeper into the system. Red light, which you see a lot, right? There's red light therapies. That's really great for surface level for skin. Now, both of those, red light or near infrared light, are going to stimulate cytochrome oxidase C production, which helps to create more ATP, supports mitochondrial health. Also, both of these will stimulate blood flow and oxygen utilization in the body. So that's really great. They also help to decrease neuroinflammation. But again, the near infrared light that's in this helmet is going to be more specifically for cognitive health. And it's great. This helmet is super simple. You literally put it on. You can adjust it to your head size. I have a giant head, so I have it on the biggest size. And then you set your settings for, we have a few different protocols. Neuronic has protocols that are both for more alertness or for rest. And that depends on what wavelength, or not what wavelength, excuse me, what intensity and what pulse duration that you're using. So for example, our focus protocol, which is one of our protocols, will use a 40 hertz pulse duration, which is going to stimulate more active brain response, more of the gamma brain waves. And then the peace protocol that we have, which again, as you might imagine, is more for down regulation of the nervous system, uses at 10 hertz at a very low intensity to help shift your brain waves into more alpha delta waves for sleep. So that's a very simple way to say we can utilize, again, we're harnessing light, near infrared light. The sunlight that we have has the whole spectrum of light. We're just taking one part of it, putting it in this helmet, so you can get that benefit in a more targeted way.
Right. Yes. And for anyone who's new to these concepts, my regular audience, we've covered this a lot, but I want to make sure that this is helpful to everybody. We are deficient in infrared light, and the research on how important infrared light is to our health in every capacity, I think, is only just getting started. So just talk about that a little bit. Like this isn't like, oh, we discovered a drug that makes this thing happen. Like this near infrared light is a critical element to human health in general.
Yes. Yeah, it is. As you said, we're deficient in it. Again, once because we're deficient in a lot of natural light. So, but near infrared light, as we know, it supports kind of vascularization, movement of the blood throughout the brain and throughout the cells. And this is also something that's going to help with that waste product topic that we discussed, sort of moving the waste out because you have better brain flow or blood flow, excuse me, is going to be very important. There's actually an animal study done that showed that with the near infrared spectrum, that you can see reduction in amyloid beta when used regularly. Now, granted, that's animal studies, so you always have to say that with a caveat that we don't know what that would look like if it were to be taken over to humans. But it does sort of point to how much near-infrared light can help to reduce inflammatory processes in the brain.
And are you seeing that when you're testing out these devices? Like, are you seeing
that's
changes?
not we can't, we don't have a lab where we can look at a human brain in that way. But we can talk about the symptoms that we see and the
yeah, and that's all I meant. Like, are you, when you take somebody who hasn't been using this and put it on them, like what's happening?
Yeah, I think we've seen, this is all from sort of anecdotes from users who've come back to us. We've definitely heard anecdotes of people who, as caregivers, who've had their loved ones using this and they see improvement in recall or less brain fog. I like to say it also for the caregivers that the nice thing about our device is it's not something that's only meant for someone who's not healthy. In fact, for someone who is healthy, who is the caregiver, this can be a huge help to supporting your own nervous system. Use it, please. Because
another beautiful thing about not using drugs, like don't take their drugs.
Right, don't take their drugs, but do use their light
helmet.
Yeah, because I think caregiver burnout is a really under addressed issue. And again, that's a massive amount of stress. It's a massive amount of that. And so if you can be doing things to support your body, then you're going to be able to support the person who's dealing with the issue even better. But yeah, we do. We hear some pretty amazing stories. Again, I like to preface this to say that everybody's going to respond to different energies a little bit differently. So it's not like we could say this across the board. But the research on photobiomodulation, which is just light therapy, is actually pretty robust. There's hundreds of papers that have been put out about how light interacts with our cells and how it can have a positive impact on the cell when used in the right way. So I'll say that as the caveat that yes, we do hear about these great stories and we hear that people really like it and they feel a difference. Sleep is usually the first thing that they see improving. almost always and it's not just with the like peace protocol that I mentioned earlier. Almost always the first thing that people see a change in is their sleep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's, to me, if you can improve the sleep, then a lot of other stuff gets better.
Yeah.
So,
There's like the downstream effects of that are wonderful.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
even as I said, we have kind of what we call our glow protocol, which is like full intensity, full blast, no pulse for 10 minutes. And people will use that and they'll, at any time in the day, like first thing in the morning. I use the glow protocol when I'm like drinking my coffee in the morning. And people will still see an improvement on their sleep in the evening, because again, if you've provided more support to the cells so that they can function properly, you're also helping to support their circadian cycles. Then you're going to see a downstream effect on things like sleep and rest.
right. And that's the good news, because, we started out by talking about how we have the systemic effects of trashing our mitochondria can show up as multiple different types of diseases. That the systemic effects
Right.
of supporting our mitochondria the other way can show up in multiple different types of improvements.
Yeah, it can show up as feeling a lot better throughout your day, feeling more alert. If you have, I've actually tried using this as like, if I have like an afternoon where I'm getting a little bit of like an afternoon like slow down, focus, get that, mitochondria back up, give it some support. It's always about support. That's ultimately the key here, is how do we support the brain so that it can do the things it needs to do in its best capacity.
Cool. So just to wrap up, in your work in academia and in the commercial world, like translating this science into devices that can be supportive for people, what's your high level take on, what's next, what's coming up, how things are changing? We touched on it a bit, but just, your
Yeah.
most optimistic high level take.
Yeah. Thank you for asking for my most optimistic take. I feel like a lot of times you get sometimes you get on conversations and people want to be like, what's going to go wrong? No, I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think as we talked about it in the beginning of this podcast, we're seeing a shift away from people wanting to find a fix into people wanting to find support for their body. I think whether that's because people are just learning more about their bodies and they understand it a little better or not, more companies are emerging that are in the supplementation space, that are in the health tech space, that are focused on how do we support the body rather than, oh, you have a problem, here's how you fix it. And so to me, that's great, because that means that people are starting to think about what their body is first, and then what it needs to be its best, right? It's like, again, nutrition is a huge part of that. And if you think about it as, okay, what are the nutritional needs that my body needs to exist in its most optimal state? Well, then it starts to make sense. Like, okay, why do we eat a lot of vegetables? What are the vegetables you're eating? Where do you get your vitamin C? All these factors play into how you feel every day. And so I think people are starting to realize that, as, again, rather than like, how do I make myself feel better? It's like, oh, how do I support the body so that I always feel good?
Yes.
Personalized medicine also,
Yes.
I think I think precision or personalized medicine, where people come in and they do labs and they kind of look at what their specific genetic makeup might need. Initially, maybe 5-10 years ago, was really out of the ballpark for most people. It's pretty expensive, pretty costly. As these technologies improve, we learn we can decrease the cost on things like that more and more. And I think that's where medicine is really headed, is people being able to be more individualized medicine, more precise to what their specific body needs are, because we have that ability to look at that information with these labs, but also, again, in a cost-effective way. That's always been the big barrier in my mind, is like the cost, and now that cost is coming down. And people are putting more money into their health. That's been I think a good shift that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years, is that people are prioritizing their health more and putting more of their like money into it rather than into other things.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I see all those trends happening as well. And partly because, they have to.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Yeah.
getting so sick. It's like, what is going on?
Well,
But
it is a little
it
bit
is
of a force.
bringing out, yeah, a a more balanced perspective. Because I think, a lot of us grew up, it's like, oh, you don't think about your health till you get sick, and then you go to the doctor and you do what the doctor tells you. Like that was
Right.
that was it, the end. And maybe if you were holistic, you do a naturopath instead of a doctor, but that was, whereas we are now being called and challenged as a population
Yep.
to start thinking about it our own selves and taking responsibility for it.
Yeah, there is, I had an interesting conversation with a physician recently, which is, I think, our medical systems often will train to a specific system where you specialize in something, when the reality is that's not how our bodies work. Our bodies are not designed to function as, 40 different systems. It's all integrated. And so there is, I think we're seeing a change in the way that even Western medicine, it has to make a change to look more at whole system view of health. That's why I say, even with the cognitive, talking about devices like the Neuronic helmet, yes, we're looking at how do we impact the cognitive system, but infrared light has a systemic effect all over the body. So even if you're targeting the brain, you're still going to see impacts that feel better in your entire body, again, because the nervous system is the whole body.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a question that, I think differentiates, taking a drug versus doing something like this, right? It's like, are the side effects of this negative, or are the side effects of this supportive? And we have more and more of those choices, which is
Right.
super cool.
Yeah,
Ramona, thanks for being here. This was really fun. I feel like we'll have to do it again and dig into some other stuff.
I would love that. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
My pleasure. And so if people want to follow up and hear more from you, your podcast is Hello Brain.
Okay. I've got a couple of things. Okay. So one, yes, I have a podcast. It's called Hello Brain. It is, we tackle different topics related to brain health and otherwise in an accessible way. We've got a panelist. It's me, an MD, and our host, who's kind of like our guide along the way. We've covered topics, everything from ADHD to neuroplasticity to sleep to, we're doing a nutrition episode actually. So please check that out. It's a brand new podcast. I just started about a month ago, actually.
And then, congratulations.
Yeah. And then obviously would love for people who are interested in learning more about the Neuronic products and the light therapy to go to neuronic.online. That's the main website for that. And check it out.
Cool. Yes. Get your near infrared bike helmet. It looks really cool.
Yeah, I know. It's honestly, it's kind of styling.
Listen, we're all wrapping red light face masks around our heads. Like,
yeah,
I think we can put a hat on.
Yeah, it's designed to be kind of sleek and stylish. It's not bad.
Yeah. No, these are the things we need to do in this day and age. So, all right. Thank you again for being here, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You have made it to the end of another episode of the QBC podcast. Congratulations and well done. Don't forget to visit us at qbcpod.com. That's qbcpod.com. You can find all of the episodes, all the links in the show notes, the tools that I use, links to the Institute, all of the things. And please do join the QBC free community if you haven't. That's where we send most of our updates. All right. Thanks for being here. If you also, please make sure you rate this podcast wherever you listen to it. There's so many millions of places these days, but it really helps. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.